Well, it looks like we are in some serious trouble with the economy. And just like I predicted in my March predictions, I said that March 12th and March 13th would be important days to look at because of the important transits I saw in the USA birth chart. That gave us a lot of information that there was going to be something centering in the United States that was going to be affecting the rest of the world. And we see that it's a banking crisis with these regional banks. Now, the Federal Reserve and the government have announced that they're going to backstop all of these depositors. So they're going to be funding all these deposits. But the markets are still very rattled because of the raising of the interest rates that the Federal Reserve has been doing for a while now. What happened is it's been affecting the bond market. So that's what's been affecting these regional banks. I feel, based on the charts, the astrology, we are not out of this banking crisis yet. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at President Biden's chart because it's so important to look at the world leaders that are involved. But I feel like we are heading into a major crisis. This could be akin to the 2008 financial crash. We are there, folks. So even if it's not showing up right away, we are there. This is another 2008 financial crash. And in a lot of ways, this might be worse. I feel like we're going to be in a sovereign and corporate debt crisis. So get ready. We're going to look at Joe Biden's chart. I feel like I'm going to give you an important date with that as well. But even in the upcoming months, we're going to see a lot of things moving very quickly. For those of you that are new to my channel, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure that you don't miss all my videos. Make sure you hit the notification bell. And also, I wanted to let you all know about a special deal I have going on my website. If you want a personal chart reading, 40% off all readings right now if you use code name Thor at checkout. So that's a really good deal, and it's going to be till the end of the month. Take advantage of this time to either get a recorded reading or book a Zoom reading with yours truly here. I also want to tell you, I'm going to give you this disclaimer. Reading is for entertainment purposes only. It's not meant to replace professional financial advice. So, this is about the economy. So use your own research, use your own data, make your own decisions. All right. So let's take a look at President Biden's chart because I do feel like this is giving us a lot of indicators of what's going to be happening as far as the United States. I feel like we are in this crisis now. Okay. Now, whether they're reporting this, fully accurately in the media, I'm not so sure about that. I feel like what happened on March 13th, between March 10th and March 13th, I feel like that was a serious, I feel like that was a Lehman Brothers moment in my mind. Even though I know they're coming in and they're saying we're going to backstop all of this, I feel like this is serious. This is reminding me of 1929, but we're a little bit more advanced, so we can kind of paper over things a little better nowadays. All right, so let's take a look at President Biden's chart to get a sense of what's going on in his chart. One of the things that I brought up in one of my former readings with President Biden is he entered a new Mahadasha back on, September 21st, 2022. So a while back, he entered what's known as Saturn Mahadasha. That's a pretty long period, but it's a huge change. When you enter a new Mahadasha, it's really big. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that when anyone enters Saturn Mahadasha, even if it's just Saturn Bhukti, this is a time of really difficult, heavy karma. So not only is, there are a lot of difficult karma that President Biden's facing right now, but there's also this idea of, Saturn is literally the Karaka planet for old age. So he's definitely feeling it. He's definitely feeling, the weight of all this responsibility on him. Okay. And obviously we're seeing what Saturn's bringing up since it entered the sign of Aquarius. Remember, transiting Saturn It entered the sign of Aquarius on January 17th, 2023, and it's going to be there till March of 2025. So this is where I feel like in an overall way, I feel like this financial system reset, if we want to call it the Great Reset, it's really going to be taking place between these 2 years, this 2.3 years during the Saturn transit. By the end of this Saturn transit, and I feel like this is more towards 2024, even looking at, President Biden's chart, I feel like that's when we're going to see the introduction of probably the digital currencies, the central bank digital currency, or the UBI. That will probably be in the latter half of the Saturn transit. So in the first half of the Saturn transit, what we're really looking at is when Saturn enters a new sign. And so let's back up for a second. When Saturn enters a new sign, since Saturn's such a slow moving planet, the first few months of when it enters a new sign, usually, that's when we're being introduced to whatever the new karmic scenario is. So that's what's happening right now. The karmic scenario is being introduced. Okay, we're seeing that there's a banking crisis. Okay. Now, notice, remember, I said President Biden's in Saturn Mahadasha. So again, even as a transiting planet, whenever you're running the Mahadasha or a Bhukti of a planet, you want to focus on that transiting planet is going to be the most important planet really to look at, besides like Rahu and Ketu. And we're going to talk about Rahu and Ketu in President Biden's chart in just a moment. There's a really important transit happening in June where I think I'm going to give another prediction date of something could be happening around that date, really negative, okay? Around June. All right, so let's go to talk about Saturn's in the fourth house. Saturn's being highlighted in President Biden's chart. Also notice though, so Saturn is activating this house as well. And it's activating K2. K2 is associated with losses and separation. And it's those kind of losses that you can't do anything about. It's like you put your hands in the air, the outside world is just kind of moving and things are just happening. So there's a lot of what's happening, believe it or not, President Biden, at least according to his chart, I can't really vouch and say exactly what he thinks, but according to President Biden's chart, a lot what is happening is outside of his control. So the banking system is not really directly in control of the US president. There's a lot of things and factors. The economy has a lot of forces that are acting upon it. But there is this feeling of a loss of control. You'll notice Saturn's transiting the fourth house, which represents homeland. It represents homeland, especially in Joe Biden's chart, patriotism, homeland. Saturn is the karaka usually of government. Government and stability is what it usually represents. So it's like the stability. But K2 has that scattering effect. If we want to think of K2's like almost like scattering this planetary influence. Okay, so Saturn's going over K2 in President Biden's chart, and it's like this sense of law and order, which Saturn represents, the sense of authority. It's being diminished because this is like, going over K2 is like, it's like going over, Thor's hammer there. There's not as much, Saturn is a little bit more dispersed. It isn't as strong, even though it's in the sign of Aquarius, it's going over K2, which is like almost this dispersal agent effect. So it's almost like Saturn's being weakened in President Biden's chart. So it's like the government's going to be trying to respond to this crisis, and maybe there's not a whole lot they can do. Like, for example, the inflation crisis, they've been trying to deal with that for a while now, and they can't really, there's not a whole lot to do. So there's some frustration there. The other thing I want to point out really fast is Mars. You'll notice Mars is aspecting. If we count the houses here, the eighth aspect of Mars is also on Saturn in President Biden's chart. So this is a tremendous time of frustration. I can tell you that. Okay. Saturn and Mars are definitely not friendly planets to each other. Now, the other point I wanted to bring up is transiting Rahu, not natal Rahu, which is over here. This is basically what got President Biden elected. He was in a Rahu Bhukti when he got elected. But if we look at the sixth house here where transiting Rahu is, October 30th, I feel like this is going to be the most acute part of the crisis between now and October 30th of 2023. That's why I say I feel like 2023 is going to be worse than 2024 when I'm looking at President Biden's chart. I feel like this is worse because you'll notice Rahu's going over the sixth house of President Biden's chart. The sixth house represents things like debt, it represents war, it represents conflict, disorder, it represents imbalance, things like that. So there's a lot of imbalances that are happening, like a cost of living crisis, all these things that are happening in the homeland. Look at that. Moon is there, homeland, right? Just like fourth house represents homeland. So there's a sense of loss. Now, sixth house, this is where I also feel like I see this crisis. Remember, sixth house represents things like debt. So a debt crisis could be also indicated here. Debt crisis, sovereign debt crisis, or corporate debt crisis. So this is what we could see happening later down the road. And of course, Rahu is a malefic planet. So when it's going over your moon, this is a tough time for anybody. Rahu's a naturally malefic planet. And so when Rahu's going to be going over President Biden's moon, and let me look, I wrote it down over here on June 2nd. This is another date we'll have to look at, June 2nd, 2023. So in a few months from now, a couple months from now, that's when Rahu is going to be directly over the moon in President Biden's chart. Now, there's a few indications. This could be bad for the health of President Biden, around this time. But this also could be something dramatic happening in the country because of what moon signifies in the chart. So something bad happening in a homeland around June 2nd. And considering it's March, that's only about 3 months away. So that's pretty close by. With a lot of these astrological transits, which just recently happened in the USA chart, I mean, it could happen sooner, but that's the date I want to give you. June 2nd is another important date. But I feel like we're going to be in the crux of this crisis till the Saturn or till the Rahu transit, till October 30th. So that's what I see happening. Now, one of the ideas I wanted to also pass on to all of you is this idea of the moon chart in President Biden's chart. When you're over the age of 50, what happens is your moon sign actually starts to become, it becomes more important. Okay. The older you get, the stronger your moon sign comes. So your ascendant sign is always going to be important, but especially after the age of 50, when all the planets mature, that's when your moon actually becomes like really important to look at. When you're looking at mahadashas, bhuktis, transits, you always want to look at them anyways, but it even gets more predominant after the age of 50. So if you take a look at where Saturn is in this chart, in the moon chart, Saturn's in the second house. Again, afflicting asset prices is interesting. If we're looking at Biden's chart and kind of using this as an oracle to think of what's happening in the country. So a suppression of asset prices, because remember, President Biden's in the Saturn Mahadasha. He just entered. We have an aspect to the third house here. We have an aspect to the eighth house. Okay, 1, 2, we can count these houses, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, there's the aspect to the eighth house here, and then there's the aspect to the 11th house there. And I know I kind of just destroyed that chart there, but Saturn's aspect, Saturn's aspect to, I find this interesting, to the eighth house of the moon chart. This could be bankruptcies. I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot of corporate bankruptcies. We're going to see a lot of corporations that don't exist anymore after this crisis that we're going through. I feel like this is the mega one. If people have been wondering, like, is this the mega crisis? I feel like, yeah, we're going to see a lot of corporations insolvent. with this, and it's going to be bad on some level. Also, I do see a stock market drop. Look, Saturn's aspecting the 11th house. K2's there in President Biden's chart. So I feel like we're going to see a big stock market drop in the next. Now, I feel like it's going to be happening in the next couple of months. Okay. So I feel like we're going to see a big stock market crash this year, and we're going to see a lot of emergency measures brought in from the government. Okay, so I believe we're going to see even more than this backstopping of deposits. I feel like there's going to be government intervention. I feel like there could either be stimulus or something along those lines, but there's something that's going to change course. And I'm feeling that the pressures are going to be very strong on, either reversing or stopping the interest rates, just because the economy is going to get so bad. It's, even though they're trying to get inflation under control, it might be quite difficult to keep raising the interest rates when you see everything's kind of uh to use an analogy, when you see Rome burning, it's kind of hard to keep that process going. But I feel like we're in for a wild ride. June 2nd is the date I want to give you for another potential difficult event. I find it very amazing that we were able to know that around March 12th and March 13th something was going to happen. The response, even though it looks like it's being contained, they said with the backstopping, but I feel like this is a major crack in the system. Okay, so it might have been papered over, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think down below. I feel like this crisis, we're going to be going in deep with this one. I don't feel like it's one we're going to just kind of, skirt on by. So thank you for watching, and I will be seeing you in the next video.